Hello, my friends. Assalamu alaikum. The question for today is how spiritual practices prevent epinephrine and norepinephrine from binding to beta receptors. Let's begin. My friends, spiritual practices such as meditation, prayer, and mindfulness can influence the body's stress response, including the release and effects of stress hormones like epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and norepinephrine. These hormones are part of the fight or flight response and act by binding to beta receptors in the heart and other tissues, leading to increased heart rate, blood pressure, and other physiological changes associated with stress. Now let's see how spiritual practices influence this process. Number 1. Reduction in stress hormone release. My friends, spiritual practices often activate the parasympathetic nervous system, that is PNS, which is responsible for the rest and digest response. This activation can reduce the activity of the sympathetic nervous system, that is SNS, which is responsible for the fight or flight response and the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. My friends, studies have shown that regular prayers or meditation can lead to a reduction in the baseline levels of stress hormones, including cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. This reduction occurs because spiritual practices like meditation or prayers help regulate the stress response, preventing the excessive release of these hormones in response to stressors. Number 2. Impact on receptor sensitivity. My friends, chronic stress can lead to the overactivation of beta receptors, making the body more sensitive to the effects of epinephrine and norepinephrine. However, regular engagement in spiritual practices can help reduce overall stress levels, potentially leading to a normalization or desensitization of these receptors, making them less responsive to stress hormones. My friends, spiritual practices like deep breathing, prayer, and meditation are associated with a decrease in heart rate and blood pressure. This reduction can be linked to decreased activation of beta receptors as the body is not in a heightened state of alertness. Number 3. Neurotransmitter balance. My friends, practices such as mindfulness, prayers, and meditation can increase the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin and gamma aminobutyric acid, also known as GABA, which promote relaxation and counteract the effects of stress hormones. By balancing neurotransmitter levels, these practices can reduce the impact of epinephrine and norepinephrine on beta receptors. My friends, now let's look at some supporting research. A study published in Psychoneuroendocrinology found that spiritual practices like meditation or prayers reduce the secretion of stress hormones and enhances the parasympathetic response, leading to lower levels of epinephrine or norepinephrine. My friends, another study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism demonstrated that spiritual practices significantly decrease cortisol levels, which are closely related to the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. My friends, I will conclude by saying that while spiritual practices may not directly prevent epinephrine and norepinephrine from binding to beta receptors, they help by reducing the overall release of these hormones and by promoting a more relaxed physiological state. This decreased activation of the stress response can reduce the likelihood of these hormones binding to beta receptors, thus preventing the associated stress-related symptoms. My friends, I hope it is clear by now that spiritual practices play a very fundamental and positive role in our life because they connect us to the higher power. You may call him God or something else, it doesn't matter. But the fact remains, they play a pivotal role in improving our health. Thank you and Assalamu alaikum.